Hi there guys, you're back with me, Chris Comics. For my next video, I wanted to do part 2 of my favorite Horus Heresy novels. So starting off, Legion by Dan Abnett. That was a very good novel, I actually really enjoyed it. It takes place before and after the Heresy, but mainly before, because this deals with the Alpha Legion. This is now the Alpha Legion is the 20th Legion. It's the most secretive of all the legions, but this one really explores their how they operate, more like covert operations. They're still big ass Astartes and they kill people like all Astartes do, but this explores their relationship with soldiers and how they go about their war, covert war. Also introduces a bunch of characters like the Cabal and John Grammaticus, who become very important later on. The Cabal is like the alien faction who's like against what's happening, and they want to basically push forward the whole heresy to move forward. Now, before this book, there's a book called The Descent of Angels. Not my favorite. I don't really want to talk about it. It deals with the Dark Angels. Legion is very good, and I can highly recommend it, even as a single read if you really want to get to know the Alpha Legion. Next one is Mechanicum by Graham McNeil. Very good book. Deals with what's happening on Mars, which is to do with the cult Mechanicum and the tech priests and the forges, all that kind of stuff. Very cool. It doesn't completely go into all of their detail, but it does bring in some knights and some more like servitor type battles. Very cool stuff. But yeah, it really delves into the whole history of the Mechanicum and how they are tied into the Imperium as a whole, how they basically swore loyalty to the Emperor of mankind. The Mechanicum thing was that they saw him as the Omnisire, which is like the equivalent of a robotic god to them, because he was so smart and he had so many details that they didn't know. So they used that as an impetus to basically name him their god, even though half of them don't believe, which is why Mechanicum deals with the civil war on Mars. Now, basically, that happens because Horus has entreated Mars to try and get their support for his rebellion against the Emperor. So there's a big schism on Mars, and two factions: one loyal to the Emperor and the Imperium, the other one obviously in Horus's favor. They have a big fight there. Very cool story. Doesn't focus completely on that, but the battles that they do talk about are awesome. Next, we're going to another Graham McNeil book about 1,000 Suns. This also goes back before the heresy started. It does end up right in the middle of it, but it starts before, dealing with Magnus the Red and his 1,000 Suns Legion. They are more all psychers, meaning they are more like attuned to the warp. So most of their abilities are kind of, persona non grata at the moment, because there's a big conclave that decides that legions and soldiers and companies and all their warriors are not allowed to use psycho powers anymore, because it's deemed a danger to the Imperium. So that is what happens in that book, and Magnus obviously argues against that because he's probably one of the strongest psychers in the entire Imperium. So he does have support from some of the other legions, but when they get to the conclave, there's a few others that have also voiced their displeasure with that, and eventually, because of Magnus's transgressions in some of the areas, the Emperor decides no legion is allowed to use it anymore, and he outlaws it. So most legions in the 30k universe basically have been told no, you're not allowed to use your psychers anymore, and they have to just be normal soldiers. No more use of that ability. Now this ends. Well, this story basically Magnus doesn't listen. He's too curious, and he's too invested in his own explorations and studies into the warp and other sorceries, that he ends up transgressing. And also during this time, he figures out that Horus is actually turning traitor, so he tries to warn the Emperor. But in doing so, the Emperor had started to do stuff in the Imperial Palace to protect it from demonic invasions and stuff like that. But for Magnus to get there and to warn his father, essentially the Emperor, he had to break those seals, and in doing so caused massive damage to the Emperor's plans. And then at the end of this book, the Emperor has basically dispatched one of the other legions, the Space Wolves, to bring him back. And sadly, that doesn't turn out the way everyone wants it to. The next book, it's Nemesis by James Swallow. It's not the best book ever, but I really enjoyed it. It follows a group of assassins trying to assassinate Horus. Now, it's very interesting. They explain to you like a lot of like the Eversaw, the Vindicare. They try to explain to you how their thing works, and that's very cool. I found, but it has a nice ending as well. Not in the way you think as well. The book series is still super long, so you can imagine it's not going to be in the death of Horus, but still, it's a very nice little adventure. Also, some awesome action scenes. And then the last book I want to talk about is The First Heretic by Dembski-bowden. This one, I think, next to Fulgrim, is probably one of my favorites of the entire Horus Heresy. Some of the other ones that are coming up in the future videos I'll also talk about, they're also very cool as well. First Heretic is basically also taking place before the heresy starts. A lot of these new middle books and later books go back in time to explain to you what happened to certain legions, just to get you into them, so you understand their perspective. This one specifically takes place dozens, if not 100 years before the heresy starts, with the word bearers and Lorgar. Now, Lorgar is a very religious person, and he basically puts the Emperor on this like pedestal. Now, the Emperor is staunchly anti-religion. He does not like that at all. He does not want to be perceived or anything as a god, and Lorgar just does not listen, and the Emperor finds out about this. And on one planet, Monarchia, he basically makes an example of the word bearers. He evacuates the entire city that they built to honor the Emperor. They blow it up. The Ultramarines help the Emperor in this regard. They blow up the entire planet, and they basically settle that no, you'll never. He censors him, basically censures him. Tells him, no, you'll never do this again. If I find you doing this again, your entire legion will suffer. And basically, the Emperor makes all of them kneel, and he tells them what's what. And I really like that scene. It's very powerful. It's the very first scene in the book. Very cool. And then after that, Lorgar is completely. He takes a few years off from being like the main leader of his legion. He tells his legion to do exactly what the Emperor says, but because he's so disillusioned with what happens, he starts to study other means of worship, because he finds out that there were the demonic presences that he came from his planet are actually real and tangible. So he writes another book called the Book of Lorgar, which has the imperial which is his truth about what the Emperor is and what actually deserves his loyalty. So he goes on a massive quest throughout this book to discover where these entities lie and how to get to them. He uses some of his biggest lieutenants, or his most closest lieutenants and warriors and captains, like Argotol. They go into the warp. When they come back, they are completely changed. Cadia is a big influence, a big part in this book. That's where they find the means to get into the warp and discover how or what lies in there. And the book ends with there's also a bunch of custodians who are also placed on a lot of ships throughout the expeditions throughout this time. More specifically on the word bearers vessel, because they're very distrusted after the Emperor censored them heavily. And Argotol and one of the custodians have like jibes at each other, and they do have very philosophical discussions about why they do what they do, why it's important to do this. And obviously the custodian, because they are so stoic and loyal to the Emperor, they don't always listen, and they don't always see the nuance to those discussions, and they just end up clashing over and over again. And the book ends very well with a nice like action scene, but also the seeds starts here. The seeds were sown here hundreds of years before Horus fell in false gods and became corrupted there. This is where the heresy starts, with Lorgar and his word bearers. But thanks guys, I just wanted to talk to you guys about the next 5 books that I actually really enjoyed throughout the series, and I'll join me next time for the next part of this series. Thanks guys.